We come to the 19th presentation in this year of Parayana, the way across, or the way above, the way beyond, that there is, in fact, by now, on this planet, in terms of civilization, a veritable, well-explored path in terms of this planet. What has never been fully explored is going off-world, off our planet. And the first geography of that exploration is our star system. And that geography of the star system means that we are moving into what used to be called, and was accurately called, a high frontier. The high frontier is off-planet, off-world, but still within our star system, and yet leading is a vision scalar that has always reoccurred in civilization, and that vision scalar is for all of the stars that one can see, and because of advances over the last century, just been a century, beyond what stars we can see. And by 2014, we're able to look with new qualities of seeing that give substance to the vision that has been there for some while now. What is being built in the Atacama Desert of Chile on an international cooperative basis, the great telescopes that are already there and working, the large 4 telescopes, each one of them 8.3 meters in diameter, are able to work individually or in tandem, or have connections with other universities around the world, around the planet. But they all, as far as that has gone, as remarkable as it has gone, are going to be dwarfed in about 6 years' time. 5 or 6 years. By 2019, 2020, let's say 2020, so that we have a way to see that gaining 2020 vision is now going to be available for actual sight, physical sight. A whole mountain top has been leveled, and on this leveled mountaintop, quite extensive, dozens and dozens and dozens, scores of acres of desert land, is being built a very, very powerful telescope called Magellan. And the Magellan Telescope will have an Earth-based, better called the planet Terra, a terrestrial-based telescope that will have 10 times the resolution of the Hubble telescope. It will be enormous, incredibly huge. And the technology of Magellan is also being applied to the James Webb Space Telescope that will be out about the same time, a little bit earlier perhaps. And the James Webb Telescope will have the resolution of about 100 times what the Hubble resolution is. And its position will not be on the world, in the world. It will not be terrestrial. It will be 1,000,000 miles from Earth. It will be in a Lagrange area where the gravity of our planet and the gravity of our star has reached an equilibrium, and it is like a free fall in orbit where there is no gravity, but instead of a free fall around something, it is a free fall in the whole ecology of motion of the star system. Our star, our sun, and our planet, in fact, it's a double planet, our moon and Luna and Terra are a double planet for all intents and purposes. And the zero gravity points, there are 5 of them, 5 Lagrange points. 2 of them are 60 degrees before the planet, or the planet and its moons, or moons, and 60 degrees behind. And at those Lagrange points, whatever finds its way there, or in our case, for the first time, placed there, will last as long as the star system lasts. It's been 4.65 billion years since our star system began to form, and our star is good for another 7-8 billion years, so that the James Webb Space Telescope can be there for billions of years. I hope those who are finding their way to hearing what is being said will appreciate that this is a scalar that goes off any kind of chart. This is the application of a differential conscious vision field which is infinite. Cannot only deal with the achievement of placements of billions of years in terms of a star system, but in terms of interstellar frontiers, which we are just now 2014. In fact, even in 2013, by the autumn, we were already entering in, for the first time, the pioneering exploration of through the stellar threshold into the very high, the most high frontier, interstellar space for us, which is galactic. So that we have a quality of many transforms nested together. One of the classic toys in the past was Russian dolls that were nestled into each other. You would open one and there would be another. In the United States, when I was born in 1940, all the rage for little kids in the early 40s was these Schmo dolls from Little Abner comic strip. And the Schmoes were kind of billiard ball, ghost-like little cuddly things, and they would nestle into each other like Russian dolls. And when you would open one, there would be a smaller one inside, and so forth and so forth. It was like a magical realization that birthing in this kind of continuity of going to the very small is something which can be illustrated in the little hands of children. And now we are children again, understanding that we can go to the very small, to the subatomic, to the subproton, to the subquarks, into almost the vanishing of what is called phenomenality, and yet existentiality still occurs. Though it seems to be a vacuum, there is such a thing as we now know mathematically and in terms of physics, that vacuums are fertile. How do they become fertile? It isn't that they become fertile just now or just then or if or when, but the fertility of the zero field of nature is something that occurs as a massive scalar in reality, because subatomic particles can form spontaneously and be absorbed spontaneously, and in fact they can wink in and out of phenomenality in quite a regular way, and it doesn't change them at all. It doesn't destroy their phenomenality or their existentiality or the ability for that fertility to have life, meaning that it can reproduce, and that that life can gain the dimensions of consciousness, means that the old truth is really a high truth. Eternity occurs beyond any limits of existence or phenomenality or belief, etc. It is gobbledygook to say, I don't believe in God. Or that, well, I'm an atheist. It's as insane as the insanity of not recognizing that life has its symmetries. And not only symmetries in terms of even to the depths of the double helix, the DNA, but that there's a third resolving, transforming RNA, not a single helix, but a single spiral. And that single spiral coming into play with a capital P, play. Let's make them all capitals on the marquee of astoundingness, playing now everywhere, every when. In that play, the third was a double transform, just like the DNA can transform and use genes so that one calls the entire set of the transforms of DNA a genome. When one brings the third, the resolving, transforming third, the thrice greatest, into play with the RNA, which comes in many styles. There can be a silencing RNA, etc., many kinds. One now has the ability for proteins to be transformed and bring new proteins into life, so that life now is able to be characterized not only as having a genome, but also as having a proteanome. And while the genome was begun to be accessed with the discovery of the double helix, Watson and Crick and Rosalind Franklin and Maurice Wilkins and that whole wonderful group at Cambridge, at King's College, at many places in the world. It is a time when the respect for life must include consciousness that goes beyond symmetries into further dimensions. And those further dimensions only are able to be accessed when the symmetries that begin out of the zero field of nature producing phenomenality, which then matures into existentiality and becomes a life which is shareable all the way through the transforms, the great symmetry of forms of life that have sexuality. Their sexuality does not begin socially, it does not begin philosophically, it doesn't begin with us. Cells themselves are gender-based. Sexuality begins on the cellular level. And there are plants that have sex, as well as all kinds of animals, as well as all kinds of beings, and consciousness itself into its dimensions has this ability to have a sexuality which has a play which is not only sanctified and sacred, but is holy because it has the differential conscious infinite field and the zero nature field playing together in a grand mirror symmetry. And that mirror symmetry is able to disclose that, yes, these dimensions, when they gain full maturity, is how zero fields are fertile and spontaneously. And so the respect for genders of all kinds, of sexuality in endless array, is the quality not only of good society, of responsible cultural structures, but is the only possible way to access the real. The kidnapping of hundreds of little girls in Nigeria by Boko Haram to sell for $12 a piece as slaves is the epitome of stupidity, of not just an insanity, which it most certainly is on the basis of skewed personas, but it is an unsanity for the very context that allows for a malignancy on that kind of viral level to have occurred in the first place, because it occurs out of a deceptive, unsane milieu. And the milieu that has been unsane for a long time is civilization. Cultures are very old. Cultures go back, fading into even 70 or 80 million years ago with the first primates occurring. Even before that, there are insect cultures, there are animal cultures, going all the way back, plant cultures. But civilization is a crucial transform that has occurred when the RNA of a kaleidoscopic consciousness has come into play with the DNA of a world fecundity, and one for the first time has the ability to do something that we assume always that we have done, and we've only done it for about 6,000 plus years. And that is to read and write in a book. When a written language occurs that is able to be read the writer and the readers are able to both participate tuned to that access to an infinite field of consciousness which enthuses and woos the zero field of nature, so that the thrill of the fertility and the ebullience go off any kind of scalars or charts, not any longer needed to be measured on any account whatsoever. So the Parayana being offered here is being offered here in 2014 because this is a cusp of the double transform, the double chiral coda to civilization, where a comb, a brushing, is able to curry the steed of civilization and bring out the champion qualities so that that breed can have a star system wisdom to be welcomed on the high frontier, the most high frontier. We're looking at, in the phrase that now is the subtitle for the notes that are given, the original 13 sets of notes were called Parayana, entering our high Dharma way. This next 13 are entitled Coursing in the Great Way. And it is taken from the original written expression from about 95 AD, closer to about 100 AD, when in India, the Mahayana that had been seeded by a curious interpenetration that had happened, an interpenetration of an ancient Semitic quality and an ancient African quality and an ancient Aryan quality had all come together and had made this kind of triple whammy of the ability to take civilization at its node of greatest fecundity, of greatest quality of consciousness, and at that node, understanding that there had been a node for this before, and one grandfather node, grandmother node before that, and that this was now the third time where a written, literate civilization of men and women and all their variety were able to make a penetration from the accumulated heritage and to enter into a wider access, a kaleidoscopic access to the infinite field of consciousness, differential consciousness, and the zero field of nature, integral nature. And that the one and the many, the exactness of oneness into vanishing, the precision of thusness into unlimitability are free to be. We have this heritage and mean to claim it. We're going to take a little break, but first I would like to come to this document, The Tale of Sinewy, published by the Oxford World's Classics in paperback. When those who are getting the notes you will find as the 10th illustration the cover of this particular document. And this particular document, the Tale of Sinewy, was written as the author here, the translator, R.B. Parkinson. This was published in 1997, and the date of the Tale of Sinewy is 1875 BC. In approximate dates, I should think that the more preferable date is about 1925 BC, because there was a great wave from the 2000 BC carrier wave. By the time of 3/4 of a century through, by 1925 BC, great realizations were occurring everywhere that civilization was taking root and growing and taking new roots, sending out shoots, sending out creepers, tubers, and coming into play, so that now, instead of there just being a tree, there was forests. In 1925 BC, a Semitic genius named Abram had a vision that though the family had had to leave the ancestral home in Ur, a city founded as part of the Sumerian civilization way, way back when, had been forced to move because the great transform of Sumeria into a much larger spread of Akkad. And the Akkadian empire, so-called, took the nexus of Sumerian city-states, even in their federation as Sumerian civilization, numbered exactly 42 cities, each one having its own temple, 42 temples, to various variations of the gods and goddesses. All that had been brought together by the first great writer in civilization, whose name we still know, Enneduanna. And Enneduanna was the daughter of Sargon of Akkad, who founded the Akkad civilization and ran it successfully for 56 years, who had been orphaned in a very odd way, intentionally, not to be orphaned, but to be found. He was put into a bitumen-sealed little nest, a basket, woven reeds, and set adrift on the Euphrates River. And this little baby in the basket on the river drifting was found by the keeper, a very important man, of the date groves of royalty in the Sumerian style of kingdoms. The species of date palms are all bear the name phoenix, rebirth. Cultivated date palms can make clusters of dates that are edible. Wild palms can only make a few dates, and they're not really that tasty. They're not really that plump. But cultivated date palms in a grove can make enough dates to feed 20 or 30 times the population in terms of a nutrition source that, when added to grains, when added to meat, when added to fish, now begin to have enough of the nutritional qualities to have a very large population, larger than would have been capable in the landscape. As Sargon expanded, that little section of the Euphrates and the Tigris River. The land between the two rivers is called Mesopotamia. He expanded it so that it reached from the island of Cyprus in the Mediterranean Sea to the Indus River civilization in India. It's about 100 times or more that size. And Enheduanna knit together all 42 temples, a hymn for each temple, under the aegis of the great patron visionary goddess that Sargon always respected, of Inanna. And Enheduanna wrote all of the myths into a mythic cycle, into a mythology of Inanna, and put the 42 temple hymns together as the generating RNA that would then fructify and fertilize the DNA of this new scale of civilization. All of this quality comes into play because Abraham, his family under his father Terah, had to leave Ur because the Akkadian family lineage came to a close with the 5th generation, and a new group came into play, and so the ancient North Semitic qualities of language and cooperative sensibility for all were overcome by a kind of foreign to them, a foreign selfishness to have power empire. And so one had a new kind of a tone in Ur, and so Terah moved his family, his flocks, his relatives, his workers, all the way to what is now beyond the northern part of Iraq into southern Turkey, Anatolia, to Haran. And there in Haran, his oldest son, Abram, who became Abraham, had a vision when he was 75 years old, about 1925 BC, about the time that the tale of Sinewe was being written in Egypt, about the same time that Zarathustra was composing his Gathas in ancient Avestan, bringing the noble civilization of the great caravans, the Arya of that counseling group that linked the man of light with the men of action through noble friends. And the word in Avestan for that was the Aryan. The Aryan were not Aryans as some kind of raciality, but they were noble as friends, as a community of counsel. And so the Arya of Central Asia, with their great caravan civilization, and the great North Semitic civilization of the Akkadian Empire, met together and worked together and played together about 1925 BC, with the Gathas of Zarathustra being written in what is today Kabul, an outlier at the time of that great civilization of Central Asia, going all the way into China, reaching all the way to the steppes of what is today Russia. And so those two great caravan civilizations met in a quality that we call now here the reference wave, that would be the reference for the next carrier wave. So that from India to the Mediterranean, from Central Asia all the way across, and from Egypt all the way down into Africa, deep into Africa, all at the same time, about 1925 BC, one finds vision as an access to a new carrier wave that had been prepared for quite some time. And when we come back from the break, we'll be able to appreciate how incredibly refined all of this seems to be when one has the ability to look at the new past, not just a dead past, and at the same time have the reverberations in a great mirror symmetry of the future opening up, finally, not just to fresh air, but to fresh being, which we are helping unshackle as we speak. Let's take a break. Let's come back. We're talking just before the break about a triumvirate, a triple meeting of a carrier wave about 2000 BC. The North Central Asian into China and retro into Europe, meeting with the great northern Semitic trade routes from the Eastern Mediterranean all the way to India, to the Indus civilization, and in Egypt all the way from the Nile Delta down into the sources of the Nile into Africa and beyond. That all of this came together in that carrier wave, which took about 75 years, more or less, for that carrier wave to cook, to be ready to be served, so that the Semitic quality got served the promised land. The Aryan quality got served the Gathas of Zarathustra. And the Egyptian got served the beginning of the great wisdom poetry of Egypt from the ancient hieroglyphic. The subtitle here is The Tale of Sinewy and Other Ancient Egyptian Poems, 1940 to 1640 BC. There are symmetries. There are resonances that belong together, that group together, that become sets. There are sets of sets which take the resonances in their groupings as a set, and all of those sets become a maha set, a hyperset. And it is this quality, then, that characterizes a carrier wave. Our particular lifetimes have seen the penetration of a carrier wave again, a monumental event in civilization. Monumental in that the most primordial of all dimensions is time. Time is the first dimension, but time does not occur in its emergence in time. It occurs, time occurs, emerges spontaneously out of a zero field that is fertile, that continues to be fertile in the sense not only of birthing but absorbing. One can have the emissions and one can have the absorptions. One can do a differential analysis on the basis of either absorptions or the radiations. They go together so that one can begin to have an understanding, like a bifocal understanding, and that bifocal understanding is guided as if it were the tuning fork, because then there are whole sets of tuning forks that group together, that go together in this scalar, and the scalar can be expanded so that one can have, for instance, like in music, the 8 notes of an octave making a set, or actually 7 notes with the 8th note a part of that octave because it goes to the jump to the next higher, which would be an octave as well. And so it's the 8th plus it's the 1st, all at the same time. So that one can have, like a piano, which will have 11 octaves as that instrument. And one can, for the first time, have a Mozart. Have a lyric, personal expression in music that had never been heard before, could never have been heard before. This is what happens 75 years after our carrier wave will be 2066. I have said a science fiction novel about 20 years ago, dedicated to my lovely wife, Nisa, because it was a revelation. What had occurred, that love had occurred in the midst of the worst tragedy of my life. That sudden, deep realization has a Greek word for it that Carl Jung made possible in his larger psychology. The word is enantiodromia. It is the sudden, complete change of the entire scalar in an instant. That does not come out of space. It does not come out of existence. It occurs instantly, but it has its origins of emergence spontaneously. The Greek word metanoia is an enantiodromia that occurs within the thought structure of a person. The usage of it goes back, one can trace it finally to Pythagoras, but its use in classical Greek is really the expressive genius of Plato. The whole development of Plato's dialogues is for Socrates to be the teacher, but in a Socratic manner. He's not teaching like the other famous teachers teach, who were called sophists. They're the ones who teach wisdom because they know rhetorically how to get it across to everyone so that everyone understands that they're brilliant, they're geniuses, and they're successful sophists. Socrates is not a sophist at all. in the Socratic manner, as Plato discloses in all of his early dialogues, is that there are steps, there are stages that are possible in a dialogue if there is a guide who is not co-opted by the sophist ethos, who keeps the vision fresh and open so that there is a metanoia that is possible. And so the early Platonic dialogues have this quality where the dialogues are with whoever is there, with Socrates, but he keeps absorbing their ploys to make it sophistic. And as he absorbs their ploys to make it sophistic, he radiates out the wave of newness. That, yes, those are objections to this and that, but this and that and the objections altogether are species of something. The Greek word for it was doxa. Doxa means opinion. Yes, that's an interesting opinion. That is a well-founded opinion. It is an opinion. It is doxa. The study of doxa is a doxology. In Protestant religion, the first thing that you're taught in Sunday school is how to sing the doxology. Still. It is something that Plato has Socrates teach, because he teaches that one can absorb the opinion, no matter how sophisticated that opinion is. And it's not a ploy, because the ploy would also be sophistic. It's not rhetorical, because the rhetorical elegance is salesmanship for the doxology. Just like the arguments are the warrior fighting for the opinion, the doxology is the ethos of all of this. Is unbelievable to object, because this is what we believe. We know that this is true. So that knowing, a sophist who is really good not only has a fine opinion that he can back up with arguments, but that he can appeal to everyone knows this. Whereas the known is dwarfed by the unknown. And that's not a doxology or a doxa. So that learning dwarfs teaching. And the learning is always a participation, not just in a Socratic dialogue, but later in Plato. After years, he founded his academy when he was 40 years old in Athens. He was born in 427 BC, and he formed his academy 40 years later in 387 BC. And he taught there until 347, taught 40 years. After 40 years of getting to where he could begin, he taught another 40 years. Plato died at about the age that the historical Buddha died, about 80 years old. But the later Plato, after about midway, after about 367 BC, began to understand that as long as someone would study in a learning mode the Socratic dialogues and be Socratic themselves in that participation, they could learn. But you could not export this to people who will not learn. It's not that they can't learn so much as that they won't learn. Refuseniks. We know what's good for us, we know what's good, and we know that that should be good enough for you. Nope. It isn't. Carrier waves hearken back to reference waves, which are the way in which the javelin is formed, and carrier waves throw that javelin through to the bullseye. But it takes the reverberation of about 75 years for it to come to like a real fullness. And that real fullness is a direct challenge. It's a threshold of challenge. It is the front of the hurricane. Not the eye, but the front that hits you. What was the hurricane front in civilization 75 years after the last carrier wave, which occurred about 9 BC? Add them up, it occurred in 66 AD. Well, what occurred in 66 AD? The Roman Empire wanted to reclaim for its empire the errant province of Palestine, which was getting out of hand with zealots and all kinds of machinations that we're not going to be a part of the Roman Empire. We're our part, and we have not our Rome, but we have our temple in Jerusalem. Right at the crest, at the peak of the power of the city of David, more ancient than your Rome. And in 66 AD, the Roman Empire received that reverberation in such a way that the subterranean anger produced a chaos within it. And the current residing Roman emperor, Nero, in his so-called madness to build ostensibly a new Rome. He showed the diagrams and models of the new Rome to his writer-in-residence, Seneca, who describes it. And Nero had the city of Rome torched. And this great conflagration of Rome, he said, it's due to Christians. They're gathering underneath the city, in the places of the dead, in the catacombs. They should be persecuted. There were probably less than a couple of hundred of Christians in a city of 2 million. Within a year and a half, by early 68 AD, Nero was dead. His replacement that was brought in from Spain as the new Roman emperor was dead. The replacement of the replacement was within a month or so, dead. And 68 AD is the year of 4 emperors in Rome. And finally, a professional great general named Vespasian was in Alexandria when all of this was happening in early 69 AD. And his legions in Alexandria proclaimed him not only the new emperor, but the end of the Caesar line had occurred, and the beginning of the Flavian emperors commenced exactly then in Alexandria, at the center of the city, where the two great boulevards met together, and on the northwest corner, the Soma, the temple holding the body of Alexander the Great for all these centuries. It was there at that confluence that he was made the beginning of a new Roman Empire dynasty. The first time that would happen. And Vespasian understood, because he had experience with that flavor that the so-called Christians to blame by Nero in Rome had, only they had it like in a very pure quality of mode that he had seen when he was a young general about 18 years before, when the Caesar Roman emperor of the time, whose name was Claudian, had gone to Britain to expand on the patron founder of the Caesar line of the Roman Empire, Julius Caesar, to make sure that Roman hold of Britain as a province was going to belong to him, even though he was not famous as a general or anything like that. He was a scholar, stuttering scholar. But his right-hand man, the general in the south of Britain, was the young Vespasian. And it was Vespasian who, in conquering the tribes and groups of southern and then western Britain, came across this group of Semitic refugees that some 30 years before had left Palestine and had sought to find refuge there and make refuge at a place that we now traditionally know as Glastonbury. And that original group was the Holy Family of the 4 sisters of Jesus and their husbands, plus Lazarus and his older sister Martha, plus the young daughter, now become a woman of about 16, which made her a full-grown woman legally. Her name was Anna, and it was her mother, Susanna, who was one of the sisters, the second of the 4 sisters of Jesus. And the 12th person was Nicodemus, who helped take Jesus down off the cross. And with Joseph of Arimathea, they put Jesus into the tomb, the unused fine tomb, that because Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea are very rich. The crucified Jesus was placed there, and he was there for, on the 3rd day, he wasn't there anymore. There's no body of Jesus. There's no tomb of Jesus. The tomb was empty. it was empty in the ancient way in which a sarcophagus eats the body. The Greek word sarcophagus means body eater. If you place a human body in a limestone crypt, a coffin, over the years, the limestone will absorb not only the putrefying, decaying flesh, but also the bones. So that the real meaning of a sarcophagus is that eventually all phenomenal trace of this body will be absorbed into the vehicle that was supposed to be the tomb, is actually in realistic deep or high dharma. Deep wisdom, high dharma, is not a coffin, but is a vehicle, is a ship that carries you to the other shore, carries you into eternity. One has to be able to understand profoundly that when Vespasian was made by declaration emperor of the new dynasty, he immediately assigned his brilliant son Titus to go to Palestine and go specifically to surround Jerusalem and go specifically to destroy the temple. And because he was in Alexandria, and because his son Titus was there in Alexandria, he wanted there to be a lieutenant general with Titus, and the most powerful figure militarily in Egypt at that time was named Tiberius Julius Alexander, because he was born just when Tiberius took over from the recently died Augustus. His middle name was Julius because the family had helped Julius Caesar win the Alexandrian War, and his last name was Alexander because Alexander the Great had brought their original family from Jerusalem to Alexandria when it was just being formed. And Titus Julius Alexander was the oldest nephew of Philo of Alexandria. So that Titus and Tiberius Julius Caesar were the two generals that went to Palestine, to Jerusalem, and destroyed the temple. Because of the trigger being pulled in Alexandria, at the great confluence of the boulevards, in front of the temple where the body of Alexander the Great was still there. And a glass cenotaph that everyone could see. It's all real. It's right there. This quality of being able to understand the tremendous power of time forms in civilization is the very basis upon which an analytic and an aesthetic of our species on this planet, in this star system, on the cusp of an interstellar frontier appearance, is of great moment everywhere that there are sentient beings. It is impossible to overstate. We live in interesting times, most interesting. Because not only does one go back to how the previous carrier wave, that previous aeon, the first person to bring aeon back into the language was Jung again. like in Antiodromia. Aeon is the Greek word for a large age. To the Romans, it was 4 ages brought together. But the Greek understanding was not Roman, it was much more subtle. It is the way in which this set of events in their articulation include an event that is transcendent to that horizon, but must be included in the octave. That this do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, that second do is a part of the octave, but also allows for the octaves to stagger so that the next octave has a heritage that is alive, hearable, musical, analytical, aesthetic, so that one can understand that there are continuities of great moment and power that dwarf empires, that dwarf alien species that would like to take over planets and star systems. They are minuscule. They are specks that a good cleaning cloth can take care of. More next week.